Okay, well, thanks Alison for introducing me. Look, it's a real pleasure to be here tonight to be able to share with you some of the journey that we've been on with high performance teams and the program, and some of the things that we've learned by working with teams and continually developing and learning from them in relation to what makes a high performance team. Alison did introduce me, but just a little bit more about me. I've got a range of different interests in teams that really get me passionate. And one is being an organisational or corporate psychologist, and having done my postgraduate studies in development and feedback, particularly negative feedback, and how we deliver that to peers, to people we lead upwards, or how we even avoid that, and the styles in which we use and how we tailor that. And obviously, yeah, startup company, growing that, leading psychologist, which we often refer to as herding cats. So it was a really interesting time. But the other part that I'm really passionate about in terms of teams, and the other part of my life, is I'm an international hockey umpire. And so in my spare time, when we're doing that, it's really rewarding in the sense that being a high performing team is essential as part of that. We don't have the luxury that teams do, where they train day in, day out together. We've got day jobs, and look, some of the players do as well at certain levels, but we've got day jobs, and we come together for 2 weeks, and we have to be the best team there. You know, we have to be the most consistent between ourselves and across games and all of this sort of stuff. And we have to do that with people who sometimes we've never met, if they're new or we're new. And sometimes we don't see people for another year or two because of the different tournaments that we're at. And so we're not always working with the same team. And so to be part of that environment is quite exciting, because a lot of the principles that we'll talk about tonight are things that we also use there. And so I hope we can share some of those sorts of insights as we go along the journey. So some of the stuff that we do within high performance teams, we do have a few processes that we're pretty much sticklers for. I know you've had a chance to introduce yourselves already, but I want us to just start to get a bit of this process going. So in your high performance teams workbook, you have a page 62. And the exercise we're going to do just quickly in groups of 3 or 4 is this. I want you to introduce yourself to the people that are part of that, name and role, where you're from. One word barometer. Now, for people who haven't done the one word barometer before, it goes like this. The sentence that you need to finish with one word as a barometer is, tonight I arrived feeling. That might be rushed. It might be excited. It might be happy, sad, tired. It doesn't matter, one word barometer. You don't have to explain that, your one word barometer. Then on page 62, you've got our conversation starters. Answer question 7 with your peers. If I had all the money in the world, what would I do? All right, over to you. A couple of minutes. I'll put some music on and then we'll get underway. Okay, well, the High Performance Teams project. Let's fill you in a little bit about that first before we start to talk about these 10 insights. It's been a bit of a journey for myself and my colleagues. We've been working as corporate and organisational psychologists for the last sort of 10 or 15 years, and what typically seemed to happen early on, and we got a bit of a reputation for coming in and doing lots of work with teams where things weren't going to plan, you know, where there was things that they particularly wanted to work on, there was problems or whatever they might have identified. And over that period of time, we obviously learnt a lot about teams, both in theory and practice, and how it all plays out. But over that time, we also started to notice that there was a lot of themes and common things that were not quite working. And then we started to also work with teams that were really going well in certain areas, and they seemed to match. And so over that time, we started to get excited about all this sort of potential that we can work with, and the amount of untapped potential, I suppose, that's out there, rather than us just working with teams that weren't quite up to where they wanted to be. And so we started to look at, well, what is it that makes up this framework of a high performance team? And the last 3 years we've spent putting that into practice and having a chance to explore that with, you know, more than 750 leaders have gone through this. And we've worked and partnered with, well and truly over 150 teams and organisations, and we've also got a pulse system which we'll talk about in a minute as well. So we've got people participating and going through there, and we've got more than 4,000 people going through this pulse system, which gives us data about how things are going for the teams and the organisations regularly. So it's quite a big learning database for us around all of that. One of the things that I suppose really stuck with us was the importance of culture and what we needed to do if we were trying to be a high performance team and emulate some of these great things that were happening with the teams that we were working with. You've probably seen the quote from Peter Drucker out there. Yeah? It's true, isn't it? Would you agree? Yeah. There's a whole range of different things. We can have the best strategy in the world, but if we can't implement it, if the team's not working, we're not firing on all cylinders, we miss opportunities or we miss deadlines or things don't execute to the level that we want. And for us, there's been a whole range of changes in the work environment over the last few years. Increasing stress. We probably all would have to agree with that. The last time there was a big study done in Australia of just mental wellness or episodes of mental illness happened in 2007, so 10 years ago. And back then, 1 in 4, so 25% of people within the last year had a diagnosable mental illness, yeah? And 45%, so nearly 1 in 2 across their lifetime would experience this. Now that's 10 years ago. You think about all the change in technology, all the stuff that's happened over that period of time. 10 years ago, most of us wouldn't have had a smartphone and wouldn't have had work email or text messages coming through 24/7 and these sorts of things. So there's a whole range of that complex stuff that's changing that we've got to adapt to in the work environment. It'll be interesting to see when they do the next big study what that prevalence rate is. And some industries that we work in, this is more pronounced than others, depending on what you do. And in psychology, there's I suppose, a phenomenon called emotional dissidence. And that's where you're being asked to behave or portray yourself in a way that's not congruent, it's different to how you're actually feeling. It burns up a whole lot of mental energy. And you see that a lot in call centre staff. We do a lot of work in health, doctors, nurses, those sorts of things, and education, teachers. You know, if you're having a bad day, things aren't going well, you can't just say to the kids, you look after yourself, I'm taking a break. Or if you're a nurse or a doctor, mid-operation, mid-theatre, you can't just get out, you know, if things aren't going well. If you're part of the air cabin crew, you know, there's no one else that you can just tap in. You've got to grin and bear it. And that takes a whole lot of emotional energy out of us. And so certain industries we find are more pronounced for this, but it's true across the board. It's true across the board. And the other thing, of course, is from a market point of view. So we've got stuff happening for us as individuals, but from a market point of view, everything's changing as well. Expectations on us from the clients are far different to what they used to be. We've got this expectation now, and unfortunately, we have to work out how to deal with these things called disrupted relationships. You know, when you're talking to your bank or your phone company, yeah? And you're talking through a problem and then all of a sudden they need to transfer you to someone else and you've got to start again. It's frustrating, it's annoying. We have expectations that this doesn't happen. Or you ring up the next day to follow something up, etc. There's also this expectation of things being immediately responded to or resolved. It's a 24/7 world. Some organisations have social media accounts and there's this expectation that people will reply within a certain period of time. And so it's all moving faster and faster in globalisation. So that, of course, heightens this risk of a low performance culture, which is why it's so important for us to concentrate on learning from and what do we get out of a high performance team? How can we emulate that? Because we want to avoid all the risks for low performance cultures, and you know this more than me, so I don't need to go through it, but we've got unwanted turnover. I'm talking about wanted turnover, the turnover that we do want to see, but the unwanted turnover within the organisation, the cost of all of that, efficiencies, innovation, it all goes down. But on the customer point of view as well, thinking about all this other stuff, we've got things like brand attitude that gets affected. How someone is thinking about us before they even approach us. You know, what mindset they're in before they even pick up the phone to ring us. So all of that sort of stuff flows through when we've got a low performance culture. And so we got pretty excited when we started to see how these teams were actually countering that and creating a high performance culture. It's pretty, and the reason, I suppose, just to go one step further than we're so passionate about it, is that work has such a big impact on everyone's life. We spend so much time there. And what we found working with these high performance teams, what we learned from them was that they got this mix right. And they had this balance between making it enjoyable, where everyone could fit in and be part of the team. And we're not talking about us all being best friends and heading down to have a drink after work or hanging out on the weekend, but we fitted in, we got along, we made it work somehow, and it was sustainable. We delivered the results we needed to, things were working. We achieved all the stuff, so they got that balance right. And for us, it was pretty exciting to start to try to understand what were the key things that were making that work, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if we simplify it and start to just think about, well, what is the framework in itself? What's it really trying to do? And the best way we try to describe it, the analogy we give, is it's like us trying to find a set of road rules for our organisation. Here in Australia, we have road rules. This pen's not too bright, is it? Let's go for a green road. We have road rules, right? You'd agree? Yeah? What am I doing? There's not too many of them. They're fairly simple. We understand them, yeah? But what it means is that we're not telling anyone, we're not cutting down diversity on the road. We're not telling you what car you can and can't drive. That's your choice. You might go for a flashy sports car. You might have a family people mover. You might have something in between. You might need a four-wheel drive, etc. No one tells or dictates to you about diversity. That's your choice, your personal choice, how you wish to express yourself, how you want to, the features that you're looking for. But what we do have is a set of road rules that we all understand. It's clarity for us, and it's how we make the system work. We all understand what a roadworthy vehicle is, so we can all make sure that, yes, we might have diversity, but it's within the acceptable limits. We understand that we need to stick to the speed limits, and we understand we have to drive on the left-hand side of the road. Does that make sense? And these high-performance teams had these road rules where they had minivans, they had camper vans, they had sports cars, they had all sorts of diversity going on their road. But it all worked. We all knew to give way. We all knew, we all knew what it was. And so before we go any further and talk a little bit about what we've learnt and share some of the things that we've been privileged to find out working with these teams, I want to pause now and give you guys a chance to discuss in your small groups again, what are the key road rules for your organisation, and how do you know that everybody knows them? We're all on the same page. Let's just take 2 or 3 minutes to discuss that and we'll bring it back in. So these road rules are an important part of us having the clarity that we need, to be able to create a high performance team. And when we work with leaders, we often spend a lot of time shifting the mindset, if they have that, around this idea that we're always trying to create certainty for our team, and make them feel reassured because we can guarantee and we know everything. All our job is to create clarity. And if we can do that, then the team, high-performing teams that we've worked with have been able to really self-manage a lot of that, and life becomes a little bit easier. So this is the model that we've got, and there's 2 factors, as you'll see, of the high-performing teams. And the first one's about how we achieve things, the results that we've got to get done. And the second factor is all about how we get stuff done, the way in which we do that, and how we maintain engagement. You see a lot of teams, sometimes when we work with them, and they always talk about how they smash their targets and how they're really good at that. But that's a high achieving team. There can be a lot of collateral damage, unfortunately, that happens in those sorts of environments. It almost feels like a widget factory. And these high-performing teams really had the balance right. They understood it. And it's human nature for us. Again, keeping with the sporting side of things, anyone got kids here? Yeah, kids sport, right? Think about it in that way. What's one of the golden rules that goes across whichever sport we're talking about with kids sport? What's one of the golden rules? Participation. And if we take that further, what don't they do? They don't win or lose, so no one keeps score, right? Well, they're not supposed to. It's about building this engagement, getting everyone to fall in love with the sport or being part of the team and being active, right? So we can certainly try our best to create that sort of environment, but when you get in the car later on, can the kids or can the parents tell you who's won or lost the game? Who scored the most goals or whatever? So innately, we always have a scoreboard going. You know, we always want to know, as individuals, we always want to know that. You know, think about it in terms of fun and a finish line are the two things that we're always looking for. Because if we're not having fun, we don't go back, you know, we quit, we do something else. And we've got to have a finish line. Imagine if they sent us out to umpire and just said, you guys just go out, look, when you're tired, just come back in. We'll just watch. Would you do that? No. We've got to have some sort of goal, don't we? We've got to have some time pressure, or we've got to keep score and all of that sort of stuff. And so this is just part of what we want. And high-performing teams sort of understand that. And they do that in 4 different ways. The first one, they have vision and action. And we'll talk a little bit more about these as we dig into the 10 insights. But vision and action is all about knowing where we're going, what we're doing, who's doing what, and most importantly, the additional thing is the governance around all of that. They're obsessed with that. They get that right. The second one, of course, is about performance reporting, which is all about data, understanding where they're going, what they're doing, and making sense of that from a data point of view. Predicting things, looking for the lead indicators as well. So they're obsessed about all of that. Moving across to the support or the engagement side, they leverage diversity. Now, we don't define diversity for them. The great thing about this framework is we give them the framework and we work collaboratively to build the strategies with them. You know, we put the pieces together with them based on what's going to work. But diversity simply means anything that potentially clashes. That can be a whole range of things when you think about it in the workplace. But what high-performing teams seem to understand, and the ones that we've worked with, it's amazing to see because they understand this diversity can become a curse if we don't leverage it, if we don't make the best use of it, and we don't know how to resolve that tension when it happens. High-performing teams understand that they have to have tension in them to perform well, to push themselves and feedback, and we'll talk more about that too. And the last one, work-life wellbeing. They have an element of both individual responsibility about that, but team responsibility, keeping each other in the loop of their goals and their dreams. And we're not talking about having to go in depth and share things that you don't feel comfortable with, but we're talking about having a level of trust. To simplify this down, it's about a level of trust, and you only do that through vulnerability and sharing. So you need to do that in a safe way, and we'll talk about what that means as part of our insights as we go through it. All right, let's have a look at the things that we've had a chance to learn as we go through and work with these sorts of organisations. The first one, vision and strategy, we just talked about that being all about the fact that we link our vision with action, we know where we're going, we know what that means for each person in the team, their role, their day-to-day stuff, etc. And they collaborate to drive improvement. If we push that further, some of the insights that we've been able to get working with these teams is that yes, they have these strategic and operational plans, like we all hopefully do, but they don't simply set aside a day every 12 months to do it. For them, it's part of a regular thing that they're checking in on. And they link that back to the individual roles. So everyone gets a chance to understand it. We're all clear on that, and they display it. They're clear on the customer, the stakeholder engagement. They've got lead indicators happening, and for them, part of what they do with their vision and their action is they don't forget the engagement side of the team. They're very holistic. They cover it all in terms of what they do. And so we'll have a chance to pause and reflect on that in a minute. Collaborating for improvement is the other key thing that they do. Now, whether it's you've got professional learning communities within your organisation or communities of practice, whatever the word is that you might be using, performance and development plans as well for every person. And I'm not just talking about performance and development plans being things that you go through and do every 12 months. It's not a tick-the-box exercise for these guys, because remember, work-life wellbeing, they understand what ticks for every person. They understand what their goals are, and so it actually means something to them, and they find they get more out of it. Take this a bit further, when they're collaborating for improvement, most organisations and teams, whether it's we have a board, we have ELT, we have executive teams, we have senior leadership teams, we have local leadership teams, and we have working parties or subcommittees. And in high-performing teams, they've got the governance down pat on that. Everyone's clear. We've worked with teams where you hear people say, oh, look, it's a bit of a waste of time, nothing happens with that working party, or, it's got no teeth, it doesn't do anything. And that's not a high-performing team. The high-performing teams seem to understand where line management sits, for example, versus where cultural change should be driven, and who's in charge of what, and the reporting structures that go with that. So what do these things look like? Just to give you a bit of a flavour for that. And you'll see in your 10 Insights magazine there some of the infographics on how we create these, how we work with teams to create these. But what they're doing is going through and taking the annual action plan and getting it down into very minute detail for us to understand, and linking it to where we need to go and what we need to do. And as you'll also see here, they're very clear on the governance. They're able to map out who's doing what's the reporting responsibilities, and who's in charge of what for line management. Sometimes you see committees or teams just building up with their frustration simply because they don't quite understand where they fit and what they're supposed to do. So what I want you to do now is have a chance to discuss on your table, in your small group, where you currently think you might fit on this KPI. Where do you think your team fits on this scale? And what would you need to do to move yourself up if you're not placing yourself right at the top? All right, in your groups of 3 or 4, just have a chance to chat about where you think you currently are and what's one step for improvement that you might have. So, KPI 2, performance reporting. As we said, it's all about data. And what we've found working with these teams is that they are obsessed with getting these lead indicators right for themselves and working out what it is that they need to know to keep themselves ahead of the game. They've also got these team data walls, HPT data walls, and they form central parts of their meetings, and again, a way which people can collaborate and share information, and they use their time effectively. It's rare that they actually have a meeting where they think, oh, that was actually a waste of my time. They've got certain protocols that they put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. So what do we mean by the lead indicators? Well, what they're doing is they're predicting the organisational outcomes that they need to achieve, and trying to work out what's the predictive and the lead indicators as well that they can come up with to stay ahead of the game. And not just that, but they're also looking outside in terms of, business or market or even political risks. One of the teams that still sticks with me today was a private organisation that had won a contract to run a government facility. And so you can see the complexity probably already there as you start to think about that for the leadership team in terms of the indicators they've got to look for. For them, they've obviously got the corporate side of things, which we all think about in terms of, keeping a sustainable company. It's about budgets, workplace health and safety. We don't want surprises in that area. But they've also got a minister who oversees what they do. So political surprises is a big no-no as well. And so you're constantly having to scan the environment for that and work out how to manage that. How to make sure it's a no surprises environment when clearly they sometimes clash. Yeah. And so these teams obsess with that and they get that right and they do that well. As we were saying, team-specific data walls to help them manage that information and make sure everyone's across that. Make sure that we've always got our head in the data and that we're looking at. You know, we talk about mega data and all of this stuff that's out there now. What they are looking for though is they don't get lost in the data. They pick the key stuff and they stick to it. And they also have these HPT data walls that we've developed with them, where we start to look at how they manage both sides, the achievement and the engagement. We can talk a little bit more about some of that in a minute. And the effective meeting protocols. They obsess about making sure they use their time effectively. So they have a whole range of things that they do during the meetings to make sure it works well. Now, we all have a chair, but they make sure it's chaired effectively. They have a moderator to make sure the dynamics of the meeting are on track. So they've got someone looking out for that. And there's 5 things that we work with them on and that we've learnt that the teams that do this well obsess and achieve. Therefore, they go out of that not wasting their time. What does it look like from an artifacts point of view? Now, this is a snapshot from some of the pulse information from the wellbeing side of it. So like I said, this stuff goes out and teams and whatnot are filling that in and we're getting that data to be able to go back. So we're simply looking at the engagement side of things here, getting our team data. Now, what's great about this as leaders is that it gives us a chance to open up that discussion. We don't have to predict where things are up to, we're being told, and we don't have to have the onerous job of solving it, coming up with the solutions, because these teams then wrestle with it. If this is how we're going, are we happy with it? And what's the solutions that we put forward? Now, not suggesting that we have to take them all on board, but we don't have to generate all the solutions. Because leaders have a lot on their plate. And the last thing they want to do is try to come up with all the solutions just to have it later on come back to them that it wasn't an appropriate solution, right? So this is gold in the fact that the team's engaging with the data, and we're just picking on one element here, and coming up with their own solution about what we need to do here. And then, of course, we can choose to implement that or not. If we have a look at data walls, and even just coming through the space tonight, I saw a few around the place, which is exciting to see that, we've obviously got some high performance stuff happening here. These things they can be project-based, so this team here is rolling out a little thing called NDIS, if anyone knows about the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So they've got a project wall around what that sort of looks like. But this team here, this one's a hospital-based one who deals with patients' quality and safety, and that's their HPT data wall. And the reason I use that is that these guys were really good because they have a lot of project-based positions. When things come in, they could take someone to this wall and spend 5 minutes with them and orientate them better than any manual could do around what the org chart looks like, what our key actions are, what we're doing, how we go about doing it. Look at our talent map. So the person within 5 minutes had a really good understanding of the team. And not just that, but they also used it week in, week out as part of their normal meetings as the normal discipline would have. But it served 2 great purposes. And the meetings, the effective meetings, they make sure, high performance teams make sure they use their time efficiently and effectively. And so working with them, we've come up with a way in which, there's a suggested meeting protocol. As we said, moderators, chairs. But we also have run with high performance teams and worked out the best way in which they can run the meeting. For example, what we found is that those teams, and this was a real gem from a few particular leaders, the leader of the group, for example, never spoke first. What happens when the leader spoke first in other teams was that the meeting always went in the direction the team thought the leader wanted it to go based on what they said, what they talked about or they didn't. And in these high performance teams, they sort of filtered it. They started off with all the stuff we would normally do, getting to, constant team building, getting to know each other, building the trust at an appropriate level, etc. Getting the team by team updates, and then the leader comes in. And they're able to then talk about what is important or spend time on things that they've already heard that they might not have heard if they spoke first and filtered it in. So they work out these little things that make use of their time, or best use of their time. So my question then again for you is, where are you currently sitting, your team, your organisation, on this in terms of performance reporting and the 3 insights that we've had? So have a chance to rate yourself and a very quick chat to the people beside you about why you might put yourself there and anything that might be popping out in terms of helping you jump to the next level. So we're moving over to the other side of the model now. KPI 3 is in our engagement space and how we do that. Now, the exciting thing about working with these high-performing teams was we got to understand how they leverage diversity, what it was that they were doing to make sure it didn't become a curse. And unfortunately, in some teams, we do see that rub become a little bit more than it needs to, etc. And they also had a culture of feedback. So when things weren't working on a minor level we're talking about, where it was appropriate, they could resolve that and they could move it forward. So what did that mean? Well, they had things like talent maps. They understood what each person brought to the table. They did team profiling activities. Again, this is just a framework that we use to work with teams. So there's no prescriptive team profiling activity that's right or wrong. It can be the MBTI, it can be anything that you want. We do ask for there to be a little bit of scientific rigour behind it, but if it's all we're trying to do and all that we've found is that a high performance team, when we try to emulate that, is that they have a common language and a common understanding, and they don't just rely on one thing in terms of profiling, but they look at their talent maps, etc. And they can understand why I get along with this person really well and why when I speak to this person over here, maybe because they're big picture and I'm detail, it's really frustrating and we get nowhere and we have to meet 10 times before anything actually works. So we can tailor that, we can get that to sort of work. The other thing that they do really well is build a culture of feedback. So yes, line management relationships still have to exist, and there's certain things that happen there in terms of feedback. But what was really good was that they worked out how to do professional feedback and they could self-manage workplace behaviour that didn't align to the road rules where it was appropriate for them to do that. Because they had a protocol, an agreed protocol that everybody knew on how to solve that. One of the biggest problems we were finding with teams that weren't high performing was they had just gone through, and most EBAs or most people's position descriptions, whatever it might be, in the IR space as well, simply said the first resolution or the first step to your resolution needs to be a local one. You need to try to solve it locally. It doesn't tell you how to do it. But high performance teams understood that if everybody got to choose what that meant, it might mean that I actually end up offending someone when I'm trying to solve it, when they've unintentionally, had some sort of behaviour that's driven the feedback. So they understood what that sort of meant, and we see this all the time. And again, in the umpiring space, it's a huge important thing for us to do very quickly. We've got to give each other feedback. Performance reporting, we're reviewing our games to make sure everything's going well in each game as well as across the day. But we need to give feedback to each other on that. And sometimes that's live feedback through the mics while things are happening on. And you don't want someone to take that personally and be put off and distracted. So how do you work out how you do that? And high performance teams have a way to do that. So, for example, they have these things called talent maps where, it could be up on their data wall like this, it could be an Excel sheet somewhere, but we look through the profile and we capture the talents that people have, the things they bring to the table. Or it might be that we've got some sort of profiling tool that we've used. And again, we're all happy for our people within the team to know that, to understand that so that we can do what we have to modify our behaviour to get the most out of each other. So if I'm talking to someone who's big picture, I do my best to modify, to make sure I don't waste their time and my time, etc. If I'm talking to someone who's very relational, I'll take that into account versus someone who's more transactional, whatever that looks like. But high performance teams understood that. And like I was saying, the other one is that this is quite common. A lot of teams might go, okay, well, we can do something about understanding what sort of behaviour we want to see more of and what sort of behaviour we want to see less of as part of our culture. But they don't always take it as far as putting up on their data wall an agreed protocol for how we resolve that. So that everybody knows that when feedback, or someone thinks feedback needs to occur, this is how it will play out. And that we're all happy with that because we've had a chance to wrestle with that as a team, rather than just have someone come up and give feedback in a way that they think is appropriate, but unfortunately it doesn't have the desired result. So they're the things that we've picked up and the insights that we've had in terms of how these high performance teams obsessively do that. How do you rate your team? That's the question. Where would you rate your team? And is there anything that you could do as a quick step to move yourself up to the next level, wherever you place yourself? Again, just 2 minutes. So KPI 4, that's about work-life wellbeing, and the things that we've learned from the high-performance teams that we've been able to work with is there's 3 key things that they're really obsessed about and that they do regularly here in this sort of space. They continuously do team building. It's not something that they set aside and do for a day, but it's something they continually do each time. We'll talk more about these in a minute. They share their work-life goals. They talk about the things that are important for them, what they're trying to achieve and where they're up to. And they prioritise their own well-being. We talked about earlier the rising stress that we're all under in the workplace. And particularly in certain industries that can be heightened or we can be more susceptible to it. So there's an element about the team looking after each other, but also us looking after ourselves and how we go about that. So what do we mean? Well, with the continuous team building, one of the examples we were looking at just earlier was how they effectively use their meetings. So it's part of every meeting. Like in your workbook that you've got and the exercise we did early on, they pick the appropriate team building exercise or warm up out of that based on how the group's going. And to start with, we thought that was great. But what we found out is high performance teams go one step further even, and they understand that team building is not just team building. Where team building often goes wrong is that the wrong activity is used for the level of trust in the group. So team building is not just team building, and high performance teams understand that. And so they'll use a certain level of team building with a low trust group. And there are low trust groups that are high performing teams. They might be newly formed or they've got regular people coming through. So we've got new members all the time. But and we're not talking about, even with high trust groups, we're not talking about everyone having to air their dirty laundry or talk about things that they're not comfortable with. But what we are talking about and what people understand here is that it's not okay to just say, this is work, I'm private. We can't help each other, we can't support each other when that stuff happens. They share their work-life goals in terms of where they're up to. And that can be as simple as understanding whether someone's career progressive right now or career stable, if we call it that. You see lots of leaders who are talking about, I can't get this person motivated. Well, often that's because their career's stable right now. They still have to, high performance teams, they still want to be part of the team and they'll abide by the road rules and they'll do what they need to do, but their career's stable. Whereas a new grad who's career progressive, wanting to climb the corporate ladder, take any opportunity to be on committees or projects, it's great to know that because we can offer that to them. And also culturally, their behaviour makes sense to us when they're looking out for that or what they're doing. And vice versa, if you've just had kids and your career's stable all of a sudden, which is, guys, I'll do what I need to do, I'm part of the high-performing team, but please don't load me up with anything extra. And that fluctuates, obviously. The kids grow up and we might want to climb the ladder again, or we might get close to retirement or whatever's happening, but these teams understand that. They understand where people are up to. And that's the same with us, the high-performing umpiring teams and sporting teams. We need to know and understand. We're away from our family for 2 weeks, you can miss people. You ring them when the time's agreed, but that doesn't mean it's not chaos at the other end of the phone back here, time zones or whatever might happen, and the kids don't want to speak to you or the partner's juggling 100 things and you get off the phone and you're pretty deflated. You built yourself up for the phone call, I'm getting to chat. And then you've got to go out on the pitch very soon. You need to have that trust built up, and that's what this is about, building trust, so that you can get support from your team to get yourself in the right headspace, for example, and that's what these high-performing teams understand. Yeah. And finally, they prioritise their own well-being. They look after themselves, so they have and they understand their own, well-being, what they need, but they have these peer support or buddy systems even, and regular check-ins. We did one a little bit earlier as part of our warm-up with the one-word barometer. When we do that exercise, the reason we do that, there is a reason behind it, and that is that it makes us pause and reflect on where we're up to right now. And high-performance teams use that regularly as part of their meetings or part of their one-on-ones, their check-ins, because it helps them then understand what's happening. Why Ben's quiet today, or why he's withdrawn versus how he normally is, because of his one-word barometer. It helps me contextualise that. It also might mean that I might grab him after the meeting and have a quick coffee and see what I can do. High-performance teams understand that, and they're able to do that. So, what does that look like? There's a whole range of team building ideas in your infographics and some of the artifacts about how teams do that. They're regularly playing little, games or warm-ups that are appropriate for them, but again, helps to build the level of trust as they disclose all of that. They understand the career goals, and they might do that in funny ways, but they have a chance to understand where people are up to, what's important for them, what their priorities are, how they can support that and not put barriers in the way which cause frustration. And finally, as we're saying, they prioritise their wellness. This one I love, the wall of wellness, this idea that this team had about let's just put our tips or strategies, or if we find out some good resources, whatever it is, on our wall of wellness. People can have a look at that and help themselves. So, chance for you to pause and reflect on where your team's up to. Where would you rate yourself, and what might you see as the next step to move yourself up? All right, so we've had a chance to go through those 4 KPIs and look at the insights that we've got from each of the high performance teams that we've been privileged to work at and work with over that journey. So thank you for going through that with us. The last thing that I'd suggest for you to do now is to start to pause and bring it all together. So we've had a chance, as we said, to look at all 4. The thing that I want you to do, though, is start to think about what the next steps are for you and your team or your organisation. If you're rating yourself along here in any of these with areas to improve, what's the 1 or the 2 things that you should prioritise and focus on, and how might you be able to do that? So bringing all of that together and having a chance to do that. I'll leave that with you for homework as something to do. And I thank you for your time. And if we've got any questions, happy to have a bit of a conversation about that now.
I think dealing with diversity is the biggest challenge for any high performance team. Dealing with differences, personalities, what we learned tonight, the stresses that come in the workplace, sometimes out of work, and dealing with those challenges that diversity presents.
I think getting management buy-in, or in fact the buy-in of all of the members of the team, of the steps that are necessary to be taken to be able to create that high performance team. We all think we're high performers as it is, and it can be a bit of a revelation for people to realise that not everybody shares that view, and that if you want to achieve a different result, you've got to take different actions. So getting people comfortable with the idea that they have to do things differently.
I think one of the big things is that whole area about making sure you've got the information, the data, and the metrics. I was actually talking to somebody earlier today, and this is what really resonated, for this evening is that you need to measure what you want to become. But of course, so that's one of the things. If you want to be a high performance team, you need the information to let you know where you are now, so you can, and also where you want to be going. So yeah, that's probably one of the big things I thought. It was good because it reminded me of something that I'd heard earlier today.
I need to start analyzing better the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and understanding across those 4 KPIs, especially how my team and especially the whole organization stands. I'm the person in HR, so I need to think about the whole company and all the other teams as well. So how can I apply that into all the teams in different levels of the organization, and understand the level across all the 4 KPIs and apply those tools to improve?
I think from the area that I work in, communication is always something that I find is a stumbling block. So I think we need to look at different ways to improve that communication and make it a more collaborative approach.
We spoke about diversity, cultural diversity and differences in people. In line with your first question, Ocean, I think it really is the biggest challenge we have, being patient, appreciating differences in people. If we can do that, that can lead to a really close-knit team. So I think that's the key.
I think going back to basics, looking at if I want to build a high-performance team environment, then where do I go to find out what that process looks like, and how do I map that process out? How do I translate our desired end state into the actions that are necessary now to be able to achieve that?
I think, again, it's that whole sobering thing about the actual connection between a high-performance team and the quality of meetings. Now, the quality of meetings was a no-brainer. You know, in the group we were talking about the fact that everybody's been guilty of having a quick sneak at the phone under the table because it's going so badly, you know. But you're just sort of a bit subconscious to what the real consequences of that are. You know, you go out and you're fed up with it, or you think, not another meeting, it's not going to go anywhere. But those knock-on consequences into that actual functioning and performance. So yeah, that's probably a thing I'm walking away with, being reminded that, you know, dysfunctional or ineffective meetings actually have a much greater impact than I realised before.
I like to see it as the whole insight of having those dimensions, those KPIs to think about. Getting those insights are important to create. I like to create my own models, but I always like to get new frameworks so I can mix and match and apply good stuff.
The well-being aspect of it. You know, we talked about empowerment and collaboration and engagement and trust, and often the well-being is missed, and that's just so critical. And you know, if we're not well, as a leader, if you're not well, you know, you've got to be first. You know, I think it's in one of the books, you put your oxygen mask on first and look after yourself so you can look after everybody else. And we need to have a culture of checking in on each other and making sure well-being is front of mind as well as everything else. So that's my greatest takeaway.